and friends. It's a big honor for me to welcome at our university a very special guest, Professor Munger from Duke University. And next guest is Martin Vlachinský from Institute of Economic and Social Studies. Topic of the presentation Professor Munger will be what is a voluntary exchange. And now I would like to thank for partners Institute of Economics and Social Studies, Tatra Banka Foundation, Institute of Savings and Investments, and the Faculty of Economics Mateja Bela University. Now I give voice to Martin. He introduced Professor Munger very briefly.
Thank you, Michal. Dear professors, dear students, let me welcome Professor Munger on your premises. Professor Munger works on Duke University, which is a private research university in Durham, North Carolina. It's one of the top 10 American universities and most of the time ranks in top 25 universities in the world. Professor Munger is a former chair of the political science department and currently is director of the interdisciplinary philosophy, politics and economics program at the Duke University. He's a prolific writer. He wrote about 100 science articles. He wrote 4 books, and his book, Analyzing Policy, Choices, Conflicts and Practices, is now a standard work in the field of policy analysis. His interests include the study of morality of exchange and the working of legislative institutions in producing policy. He's not one of the standard mainstream economists who use large chunks of math and statistics. He more focuses on the real life, you can hear from him about the sharing economy, about why milk is put in the shelves in supermarket as it is, and so on. If you open the popular podcast website EconTalk, his podcast on the sharing economy is currently the top one among several dozens of the top economists of the last decade who publish their podcasts there. However, his most popular or the most important topic is his work on self-invented topic of involuntary exchange or truly voluntary exchange. He even created the new word, voluntary, for it, and this is the topic he will speak now about to you in his lecture. As you could already see, he uses a lot of humor in his presentations, so I believe you will have a great time during his lecture. Professor.
Thank you. Thanks very much. One of the things he was kind enough not to mention was that I ran for governor of the state of North Carolina in 2008. I ran as a third-party independent candidate, and I spoke to some very small audiences there, so I appreciate having an audience like this. And I found then that often the only way I could get any applause was to lead them myself, so that's the way I started out. The topic I'm going to talk about today is one that I think is interesting because economists often start with the premise that exchange is voluntary. So they don't really say if, they say since exchange is voluntary. I assume that our dean used bribery or threats. And really bribery is sort of the same as a threat in a way, isn't it? But in either case, it was very effective. Thank you. Why would we care whether exchanges are voluntary? We would care whether an exchange is voluntary because if it is voluntary, it makes both parties to the exchange better off. If an exchange is voluntary, both parties to the exchange are better off. That means the more of those that occur, the more our society is made better off. Now, how do we judge what better off means? In economics, we tend to be subjectivists. So what subjectivism means is that people are autonomous. They're the best judges of their own welfare. There are exceptions to that, and I'll talk about some of those. But for the most part, we rely on people to make their own judgments about what makes them better off. So if an exchange is voluntary and both people are better off, and there are more of them, then the benefit to the society is greater. What is the job of government in a state where we are worried about voluntary exchange? Primary job of government then would be to reduce the transactions cost of exchange, make it easier for people to find each other and for them to resolve disputes and to enforce contracts. Now, one of the things that you might not immediately recognize that's a consequence of that claim is the threat of violence. One of the things that the state is obliged to do is to threaten violence. How could you possibly have a voluntary society where violence is threatened? Well, think about the nature of a contract. Suppose I contract with Mikhail, and he has a house that has a leak in the roof, and I am a person who fixes roofs. So he offers me 2,000 euros to fix the roof. I agree. I say I need 1,000 euros in advance because I need to buy materials. And then as soon as I get the 1,000 euros, I go, ha 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 ha, I'm not doing anything, loser. And he says, I'm going to call the police, and he does. And then men with guns come to my house. They handcuff me, and they take me away to jail. So I am subjected to violent coercion. Is that involuntary? Well, no, not really, because I signed an agreement. The essence of liberty is our ability to sign binding agreements. The essence of liberty is our ability to sign binding agreements. So both of us should want some mechanism for enforcing this contract. And if that mechanism for enforcing the contract is credible, then it means we'll both obey the contract. He'll actually pay and I'll actually perform the service. And so the transactions take place at much lower cost. So it seems paradoxical, but a theme that I'm going to come back to over and over again is that voluntary exchange requires the threat of coercion. But the threat of coercion is one that I agreed to. So, when we talk about at the end, what is the role of the state? The role of the state is to reduce transactions costs, to facilitate exchange, and to enforce contracts that were voluntarily agreed to. It's not clicking. Yeah, it likes you. I may have to toss it. So, why do we care about this? Why would we care about this? In a larger sense, there's an argument. Now, this argument may be false, but there's an argument that economic freedom fosters economic growth and high income. High income fosters political freedom. Therefore, if you want political freedom, you should start with economic freedom. Now, as I said, that argument might be false, but suppose you're a developing nation. There's a real question that you face because you can't change everything at once. So, should you have elections or should you try to establish market institutions? The first thing that you're going to do, should you have elections or should you establish market institutions? And if you have elections, does that make it more likely that you'll get markets? Or if you establish markets, does it make it more likely that you'll get elections? So one argument is, if you want political freedom, start with economic freedom. Just had to crush it. So, a lot of people don't believe that. And that's fair enough. As I said, it might not be true. The question is, if you do believe that, how could you persuade someone else? Now, I was catechized as an economist. I was raised in the economist church. I've been apostate from the path of economic wisdom because I've been in political science since 1986. But economists often believe that if someone disagrees with them, they just must not be very smart. I actually think that that's not right. There are disagreements with the argument that I just made that I'm going to try to outline today about the nature of when an exchange is voluntary, that economists are just wrong about. I think there's a misunderstanding. Economists don't understand most people's intuition about when an exchange is voluntary. I should say this may also be the reason why economists usually stand off to the side at parties and wonder why no one will talk to them. It's because we just think we're smarter and we didn't get dates in high school. So why are people not persuaded by the importance of economic freedom? Well, what really is economic freedom? Robert Nozick said that it was capitalist acts between consenting adults. So if you make something sound like sex, you can always get people's attention. George Jessel said, if there's one thing more than another public policy requires, it's that men of full age and competent understanding shall have the utmost liberty of contracting. Shall have the utmost liberty of contracting. Not showing up very well. Their contracts, when entered into freely, shall be held sacred and shall be enforced by courts of justice. So economic freedom is the ability to make contracts and have them be enforced. You are not likely to interfere with this freedom of contract. So let's put the question a different way. What exchanges should the state not allow? What exchanges should the state not allow? Are there exchanges you can think of that the state should prevent? In many societies, the answer might be heroin. That is, one person wants to buy heroin, another person wants to sell it. Both of them think they're made better off by the transaction, yet the state prevents it. Why might we do that? Well, maybe it's because we think the heroin addict is not really capable of making his own judgments anymore because heroin's actually killing him. But how far would you extend that? In New York City, they recently outlawed large Coca-Colas. It's not exactly heroin, but you can't buy a really big gulp cup of Coca-Cola. Now, you could buy 2 small ones, but you can't buy 1 big one. So what about donuts? I recently lost about 25 kilos because my wife told me she was going to go to Match.com and find another husband. So I was already big enough for 2. And I'm an economist, so I understand competition. But I really like donuts. I wish I did not like donuts. And so one of the problems that you have with the voluntary exchange is it's not just do I want this, but there's a second order consideration. Do I want to want it? So I like broccoli, and I like the fact that I like broccoli because it's healthy for me. I like donuts, but I don't like the fact that I like donuts. The heroin addict really wants heroin, in a sense. His body craves heroin. But he doesn't want to want heroin. He doesn't want to be addicted. Cigarette smokers, many cigarette smokers would prefer not to want cigarettes, but they really want cigarettes. So one of the things that you might interfere with is highly addictive, harmful substances, because you think that people are not capable of making their own judgments about that. You also might say, even then, I would want people to make their own judgments. So the question is, how much autonomy should we grant citizens? A different way of asking the question that I already asked is, how much autonomy should we grant citizens? So the core argument for markets is that voluntary exchange makes both parties better off, and the public policy implication is that the state should take only minimal action to regulate, and those actions should foster exchanges by reducing transactions costs. Another bus got here. I can't even blame you for that. Maybe a Jedi thing. That's not the coffee shop you want. You should go to the lecture. Welcome all of you. There's a lot of people want to be near the door so they can bolt. There's plenty of room out down front here. What I'm interested in is a theory of justice in market exchange that accepts the norms of market exchange, including bargaining over price. And I want to distinguish two concepts. So these are two English words that come from Latin. And actually most Americans, most people who speak English don't know these words because they come from philosophy. So these are two concepts that philosophers are worried about. So erogatory acts are those that I have normal obligations to fulfill, like my contract with Mikhail. A supererogatory act is where I actually incur harm. So those are acts of charity. If I were to give him 1,000 euros, because I know he's a poor, struggling student and needs it more than I do, I'm harming myself because I'm giving up the 1,000 euros, but I'm benefiting him because he's receiving them, and I must think the benefit to him is larger than the cost to me, which is what acts of charity are about. But if one person is harmed, but the other person is helped, but it's done voluntarily, that's a supererogatory act. So acts of charity can be voluntary too. Some acts of charity are involuntary, and those are called taxes, when the state takes it at gunpoint and then gives it to someone else. And there may be perfectly good reason for that, but it's not a charitable act. So there can be voluntary charitable acts that are supererogatory in the sense I incur harm for what I think is the benefit of someone else. What I'm talking about is not supererogatory acts. I'm talking about erogatory acts, where I do something that I'm obliged to do as a consequence of having entered an agreement, but I'm benefited by it. I'm benefited by the agreement in the subjective sense that I believe that I'm benefited. I don't have to be objectively benefited, I'm just subjectively benefited. So the claim that I want to make is that supererogatory acts are never morally required in market exchange. That is, if you and I are entering into a contract, I don't have to be harmed. I don't have to give up something. I can insist on being benefited. So this is a very complicated way. This is the way philosophers talk, as you may know. So this is what the definition of a voluntary exchange is. It can't be supererogatory. I cannot require that you are harmed by your decision to participate in the exchange. You have to benefit, and so do I. So it's an erogatory act. Are erogatory acts required in market exchange? That is, might there be circumstances where I'm required to exchange? I'm required to give you access. So, the claims I want to make is if the bargaining setting satisfies certain criteria of fairness, it's a just outcome. If bargaining is unfair, then there may be an erogatory obligation to exchange, and if the bargaining setting is unfair enough, the stronger party may be obliged to sell at his opportunity cost. So I want to tell two stories. And the first is about the Mungger, and the second, the itinerant padre. So, my name is Munger, M-U-N-G-E-R. Comes from the Old English word Munger, and in fact, my ancestor, Nicholas Munger, lived in County Surrey in southern England, came to the United States in 1651, and he did a very smart thing. What should any young man do? He married a rich girl. There's really nothing smarter for a young man to do than to marry a rich girl. I've told both of my sons that it's a family tradition. Go marry a rich girl, please, go. Mostly go. The name Munger comes from Munger, which means a seller, just a common merchant. So ironmonger, fishmonger, you've probably seen that word, but that word actually comes from the cities of northern Germany, the Hanseatic League. The Saxon word Mungera. And that comes from the notion of a merchant, or we might call him a middleman. A middleman. You heard the word middleman. We usually think of middleman as being a bad person. Well, the Mungera was the original middleman. So this is from a Psalter in 1050 AD. 1050, almost 1,000 years ago. And it's like the Canterbury Tales. The Mungera is a character, is someone who speaks. He doesn't have a name. He speaks as the Mungera. And when you read this, it's a remarkably modern conception of the role of the merchant. so let's read through it. This is the mate here speaking to an interlocutor. I say I am useful to the king and to aldermen and to the rich and to all people. I ascend to my ship with my merchandise, and I sail over the sea-like places. I sell my things, I buy dear, things which are not produced in this land. I bring them to you here, with great danger, over the sea. Sometimes I suffer shipwreck. I died 3 times, but I got better. It just sounds like Monty Python to me. With the loss of all my things, scarcely escaping myself. So he's telling a really sad story here. Now, I wrecked my ship, I had to swim, I died. Okay, maybe. But the fact is, what he does is he takes his ship to faraway places and he buys stuff and he brings it back here and sells it. And yes, I'm sure it's hard. But then the question that is asked by the interlocutor is the important one. What things do you bring to us? Well, he brings the stuff that he buys. So the question is, what does he buy? Ma'am, with the red scarf. What does he buy? Yes? The corner here with the white shirt, the black. Yes, ma'am. What does he buy? You can't, she's hiding her scarf. What red scarf? What stuff does he buy? Someone, what does he buy?
Green, silks.
You know, you can't just read it. Why does he buy that stuff?
It's the stuff that they cannot get.
It's the stuff they want.
That they want, yes, and they cannot get it at home.
Maybe they can get it, but they don't have enough of it.
Yes.
So, is it the stuff that he wants?
No.
Probably not, except in the sense that he wants it because they want it. So, that actually seems kind of nice, isn't it? That's sort of sweet. He goes, that's what I might do for my wife. I go to the store and I say, what kind of flowers does she like? And I buy them and I give them to her. No, that's supererogatory. He's not going to give this away. He's going to sell it. So there's a specific rule that he's using to decide what to buy. What is it that he expects the largest difference between the price he pays and the price they will pay, which is called profit? What things can he make the largest profit on? But the answer really is, what does he think they want and can't get? So it would be sweet if he were going to do it for free. Is it morally wrong because he's doing it for pay? Because it seems like he's being mean. He's picking the stuff they need, and then he's going to sell it for the highest price he can get. Now, surely he's not going to admit this, right? What's cool about this is that he admits it. He says that's what he's going to do. What things do you bring us? Skin, silk, a bunch of stuff. Will you sell your things here as you brought them here? Now, that might mean, are you going to improve them in some way? And you know, if I went and got a tree and carved it and made a beautiful chair, we might all think that I deserve some money for that. But he's not making this stuff better. He's not producing anything. All he's doing is buying it from one place and taking it somewhere else and reselling it in exactly the same form. And he says, I will not, because what would my labor benefit me? I will sell them dearer here than I bought them there, that I may get some profit to feed me, my wife, and children. It's always the children, isn't it? He brings up the children. It's not about the children. He wants a nice house. You know how those people are. Profits. Suppose he makes a lot of profit. Should the state tax those profits? What would be the justification for taxing away those profits? Well, one might be that he has more money than other people. But you probably want to know how he got it. Each exchange seems voluntary, doesn't it? Each exchange that he makes improves the person that he's trading with. Because he's bringing stuff they don't have and that they need, and he's selling it at a price less than they're willing to, the maximum they're willing to pay. Otherwise they wouldn't pay. This is not supererogatory. It's not a charity. Ooh, look, there's a merchant. Let's go donate. Said no one ever. What they said is, there's a store. Let's go buy stuff if the price is less than the maximum we would pay. So what he's trying to do is figure out what it is that people want, and then figure out how he can get that at the cheapest price. His profits are the difference. If he makes a lot of profits, it has to be because he has created more value. Each of these exchanges creates value in his trading partner. The more of these exchanges he makes, the more profits that he gets. Now suppose we tax the profits, what would he say? I'm not doing this anymore, I'm going to do something else. And here's one of the things that economists are just weird people. Because we see the ghosts of things that didn't happen. We see the ghosts of dead things that didn't happen. We see exchanges that don't take place and count them as costs. If we taxed away all this guy's profits, we would, and he didn't do anything, there'd be nothing to see. There'd be no exchanges that don't take place. But all the exchanges that would have taken place in the absence of that distortion would have created value. All those people would have been better off, and he would have earned profits. So that's not to say that all profits are necessarily a sign of creating value. There's other ways to create profits. What I want to put in your mind is the possibility that profits are the consequence of creating value. In this case, these are voluntary exchanges. Since each exchange is voluntary, it must be that he's creating value in his trading partner. The more of these he makes, the more value he creates and the more profits he earns. Let's look at the second example. And again, this guy's an economist. It's 1945. He's in a prisoner of war camp. Now, what a normal person would do is think how awful this was and look at the pain and suffering around it. What did this guy do? Look, markets, isn't that cool? Which is why we stand alone at parties. What he noticed was that very soon after capture, people realized it was both undesirable and unnecessary in view of the limited size and the equality of supplies to give away or to accept gifts. Goodwill developed into trading as a more equitable means of maximizing individual satisfaction. That seems like a remarkable claim. Now, here's the way prison camp economy works. Everybody gets a Red Cross package every month. And what the Red Cross package contains is cigarettes, chocolate, bully beef, which is like Spam or canned meat, carrots, all sorts of other products that they need, but quite a bit of food. Now, not everybody likes these equally well, so this is a natural experiment for an economist. Everybody has exactly the same endowment, but different preferences. So what might very well happen is, I don't like carrots, you don't like Spam, we'll trade. But the first time around, what probably happened was, I open my box, I hold up the carrots, and I say, oh, carrots, I hate these. And you say, oh, I like carrots, can I have them? Yeah, here you go. So a gift. It was supererogatory. I gave up something I didn't value to you, who value it more. Now, the next month, you come to me and say, can I have your carrots again? I think, well, that doesn't seem right, because these carrots actually have value. But okay, here you go. The third month, you come, can I have, no, you can't have my carrots. I'm going to exchange them. So that's what he's saying here. Trading is more equitable than gifts. And you may never have thought about that before. Why would, because it seemed like gifts are nicer. A nice person would give stuff away. If I give stuff away and I expect a gift in exchange, that's trade. If you always expect me to give you stuff, that's a parasite. Why would you expect me always to give it to you? Trade is clearly more equitable in the sense that if the exchange is voluntary, we're both made better off. So I only give you the carrots if you give me something I value equally well. Now here's the miracle, we're both better off. There's no increase in the amount of stuff, but we're both better off. That's really cool. Trade is a way of, without increasing the total amount of stuff, making both people, or all people, better off. The more of these exchanges take place, the better off we all are. Now here's the thing, and of course this would be, it has to be about a man of God. So it was an Episcopalian priest, a vicar, and the story was, a padre started off around the camp with a tin of cheese and 5 cigarettes, returned to his bed with a complete Red Cross parcel in addition to his original cheese and cigarettes. Was he a bad man? He didn't increase the total amount of stuff. What did he do? He moved a lot of stuff to someone who valued it more highly. He didn't increase the total amount of stuff. The total amount of stuff in the camp was all of the Red Cross packages. So what he did was he found people who didn't value carrots very much. He bought it, and then found somebody who valued carrots a lot more and sold it. Now, if those two people could have found each other, they could have had that transaction themselves and cut out the middleman. So in English, the phrase cut out the middleman just means that the two of us could exchange, but we can't find each other. And so the middleman is basically a broker who goes between us and helps us find each other, in effect, by making the exchange. So, is he a bad man? Because he started out with just crackers and cheese, and with cheese and cigarettes, and he ended up with an entire Red Cross package. Well, let me remind you that each of the exchanges was voluntary. If you went back and talked to each of the people he traded with, each of them would have said, yeah, I was better off by having this exchange. So imagine that we were trading for cigarettes. So I trade with you, you give me a can of carrots, I give you 5 cigarettes, you would have taken 1, but I give you 5, and then I go and sell it for 6. So you in effect made 4 cigarettes and I made 1. But I do that 1,000,000 times. That means I make 1,000,000 cigarettes. But you made 4 on our transaction, so you're better off. I do this 1,000,000 times. I make 1,000,000 cigarettes. I make huge profits. But each person I traded with is better off as a result. So again, the fact that I made large profits is a sign that I created a lot of value in this society. Not all profits might reflect that, but it's at least possible that they do. So this is the argument for why we might be concerned for voluntary exchange. What I want to do is raise some questions about voluntary exchange. This is a cartoon called Leo. The conceit, the premise of Leo is that he never speaks. He always gets in trouble. And here he is. He's in outer space. He's flying in his spaceship, presumably from Earth. He comes near the moon, and he crash lands on the moon, and then he suddenly realizes that he's in space and he can't breathe. Now, I'm not sure why he could breathe here. You know, he's already in outer space, but you have to work with this. And then here's an alien, a space alien, and he has a sign that says spacesuits $25 because you can't hold your breath forever. Now he's trying to take advantage of this person's desperate situation. Here's my question, is this a voluntary exchange? Sort of. The alien is not holding a gun to his head, but does he have any choice? Does he really have any choice? If he doesn't buy the spacesuit, he's going to die. It seems like the alien, in fact, for $25 isn't charging enough. He should be asking a lot more. Millions of dollars. Well, I think most people would say that in some sense this is not voluntary. Should the state regulate this transaction? Is it like heroin? Would we make him better off if we outlaw this transaction? What would happen if we outlaw this transaction? Man in the stripes. What would happen if we outlaw this transaction? What happens to Leo if he doesn't buy the spacesuit? he would die. Hard to say how that would help him. We like you so much that you should die. And yet, I think most of us have the intuition that there's something wrong with this transaction. It's not voluntary. He doesn't really have any choices. This is the situation that I made up the word "you voluntary" for. So this exchange is voluntary in the sense that he's not being coerced by human agency, but it's not truly voluntary because he's being coerced by circumstance. So that's the distinction that I want to try to develop. And it's warm enough in here, I'm going to take off my jacket. I started off with my jacket on, you all saw that. So I've obeyed the terms of my contract. All right, this is a picture of a hurricane. It's actually a picture of an image of a hurricane. This is North Carolina, where I live. This was Hurricane Fran. It had winds of about 250 kilometers per hour. It struck during the night, September 1996. We have 35 trees in my yard. All of them were knocked down. Looked like God's own pickup sticks. And if you're in a hurricane and the trees are all knocked down, all the roads are blocked by trees. The power is out. You hear dogs barking in the distance in the very quiet night. It seems medieval. And you know that if you called the police, no one would come. It's not that they won't come for 15 minutes. They won't come at all. They can't get through all the roads which are blocked by trees. So it's a pretty desperate feeling, and it's completely dark because no one has power. Now, there's a lot of things that we needed after this hurricane hit. We felt pretty desperate. But one of the things that everybody in the city of Raleigh, where I live, is the state capital of North Carolina, all of us needed was ice. Because our freezers, our refrigerators had all stopped. You could hear the food shifting in the freezer as it was getting ready to rot. It was 39 degrees the day after the hurricane went by. It was really hot. We were working outside. It'd be nice to have some ice to cool our beer down, maybe to keep medicines cold or to use to prevent the meat in the freezer from going bad. We desperately needed ice. In North Carolina, we have people called rednecks, yahoos, country people. Maybe you could just nicely call them country people. I'm very sympathetic to this because these are probably kin to me. I'm a country person myself. And you'll notice this guy over here on the right is wearing a pillowcase with the arms cut out that says 100% inbred redneck, and he has a beer. The guy in the middle is saying hello in the special ways, like a gang sign that rednecks have for each other. The guy on the left seems to have passed out. So these are not necessarily society's winners. These are people who lived in Goldsboro, North Carolina, which was the expected path of the storm. We thought the storm would go east, it turned west and hit Raleigh. So these guys lived in Goldsboro, North Carolina, and they had an idea. Their idea was, let's take ice to Raleigh. They need ice. Now, isn't that nice? What a nice thing to do. Because they knew that people in Raleigh needed ice. Except they did not intend to give it away. They're like the make here. They're thinking, what is it that we can get that they really need and then take it there and sell it for the highest price we can get? They were after profits. So they had not been washed in the milk of human kindness. In fact, looking at them, they haven't been washed in anything for quite some time. Now, on the other hand, suppose that you were a benevolent social planner. What might you whisper in the ears of these young men? Take ice to Raleigh. It's the right thing to do. Now suppose there's somebody else in Goldsboro. They're watching TV. And they turn on the Weather Channel and they see that Raleigh has been devastated by the hurricane. And they say, oh, I feel terrible for those people in Raleigh. that must be bad. And then they say, I wonder what's on the baseball channel. So they did nothing. They felt bad and they did nothing. Let's call that person A. These are person B. Who is more moral? The person who does nothing, or the person who tries to make the maximum profit by providing what people need? I think most of us, if we don't think of it, would say person A is more moral, which is bizarre. Why would you say the person who does nothing is more moral than the person who tries to take ice to Raleigh? And the reason is their reason. What is their reason? Do they care about the people of Raleigh? All they care about is profit. That's the reason we think they're immoral. All they're trying to do is make money off the desperation of these people. Well, these young men knew that to produce ice, all you had to do was apply cold to water. And there was plenty of ice in Goldsboro. So they rented 2 refrigerator trucks. They filled them with ice, which they purchased at $1.50 a bag. They drove to Raleigh. They parked in the 5 Points area and then down by NC State University. And they opened up shop and started selling ice. And then you rise as if with one voice and you say, wait, you said there were trees down. How did they drive in? I've got you now, liar. Look, rednecks take chainsaws on dates. They certainly had chainsaws in their trucks, and so what they did was they cut their way in. They cut the trees and they moved the trees off the road, thereby freeing traffic for local traffic and emergency vehicles. Was this because they loved the citizens of Raleigh? No, they wanted to sell ice. But that's a really big benefit that they had provided as a way of having more profits. So they started to sell ice. And you might ask them, as you ask the bank here, will you sell it here as you bought it there? Do you think they were selling it for $1.50 a bag? $11 a bag. They were selling it for $11 a bag. Now, of course, no one bought it at that price, right? A line formed. So many people wanted to buy ice at $11 a bag. A line formed. We have non-price rationing. There's people standing in line to buy ice. Well, it's always a party until the cops show up. Some of you have probably been at those kind of parties. Why would the cops show up? What's wrong with this? Was a crime being committed? Yes! Yes, a crime was being committed. North Carolina has an anti-gouging law. So gouge is an English metaphor for taking too much. If I gouge someone, I'm taking too much. All anti-gouging laws have 3 parts. A domain, a trigger, and a limit. The trigger, as you can see, is a declaration of a state of emergency. A declaration of a state of emergency. So the governor of the state says, there's been a hurricane, I'm declaring a state of emergency. So the law is triggered. The domain is pretty much anything that people really need. So merchandise or services consumed or used as a direct result of an emergency, or consumed or used to preserve, protect, sustain life, anything you actually need. So the kind of ice that my wife likes that goes on her neck or on her finger, diamonds in other words, that you could still sell because it's not a necessity, although she thinks it's a necessity. It wouldn't apply to the law would not apply to jewelry, but it does apply to ice or anything that you actually really need. Which leaves the limit. It is genius. Unreasonably excessive. You can't charge a price that's unreasonably excessive. It can be unreasonable. It can be excessive. But it can't be unreasonably excessive. How much is unreasonably excessive? Turns out the answer is 5%. Who knew? Who would have thought 5%? All right, so now we go back. Here's the Raleigh police. They pull up. They say, what are you doing? Selling ice. How much are you charging? 11 bucks. They probably didn't need a calculator to know that $11 was more than 5% more than $1.50. They just leaped to that conclusion on their own. I don't mean in any way to denigrate the intelligence of Raleigh's police. They probably knew right away that $11 was more than 5% more than $1.50. All right, so they arrested the rednecks. They impounded the truck. They took it off to the police impound lot. They turned it off, and all the ice melted. All right, here's my question. The people standing in line, what did they do? I want everybody to take 5 seconds and think about it. What would you do? You're standing in line. The police have arrested the people who are selling it. They've taken the ice away. What would you do?
Definitely take the bags of ice. I would definitely take the bags of ice.
Yeah, but the police will stop you. So you would want to take it, right? I can see that. But they close it up and they take it away.
I would ask them for letting us.
Yeah, I mean, why are you just going to waste the ice? This is crazy. What would they say? This is evidence. You can't have this. This is stolen property. In fact, if you try to take it, we'll arrest you. It's against the law. It's against the law to buy or sell ice at more than 5% more than $1.50. Sometimes people say, I would be angry. What the people in line actually did, they clapped. They clapped. Why would they do that? Those of you trained in economics, if you thought about economics, why might they clap? Well, why do you want to buy something? For economists, the reason you want to buy something is the difference between what you would pay and what you have to pay. That's called consumer surplus. So what you're looking for is consumer surplus. Probably for $11, the price was pretty close to the most they would have paid, and so the material benefits they expected to realize were not very large. But they did feel outraged that they were being exploited. And I think most of you would feel that too. If you see an ice truck and you know you desperately need ice, and you showed up, and so this was in '96, this is the equivalent of 20 euros now. And they say, oh, you're selling ice, that's great, I really need some. And they say, all right, it's 20 euros a bag. No, that's outrageous. Suit yourself, you don't have to buy it. Wait, no, I'll take 2. Here's 40 euros, you bastard. So you'd be angry. You would be angry that you're being taken advantage of that way at the same time that you would take the ice, which, like you said. It's true you would take the ice, but you would also feel taken advantage of. So these people had 2 considerations in their minds. One is their desire for the material benefit of being able to purchase the ice. The other is their sense of moral outrage at being taken advantage of. Well, I think this is not a voluntary exchange. It's a voluntary exchange. Nobody is holding a gun to anyone's head. No one's saying you have to buy the ice. But in fact, they have to buy the ice because of the dire consequence of not buying it. The situation that they're in is so desperate. So, they clapped. Now, remember the point is, if I wanted to offer ice for sale at $12 a bag today, I could, because it's not an emergency. The only time I can't is during an emergency. Now, think about how perverse that is. The only time you can't sell stuff that people really need is when they really need it. What kind of a dumb law is that? I used to think when I was just an economist. But then I talked to a bunch of philosophers and realized that they probably have a point. It's not just that this law prevents people from buying what they want. It is, people have the sense that it's morally outrageous for someone to take advantage of the desperate need of someone else. So, this is from John Stuart Mill. The laws and conditions of the production of wealth partake of the character of physical truths. There's nothing optional or arbitrary in them. This is not so with the distribution of wealth. That is a matter of human institutions solely. So what he's saying is, it's one thing to decide how to produce stuff. For that, we need markets. But the decision about how to distribute the benefits of markets, that's the question of social justice. So the question is he right? And in the next paragraph, he reveals a problem with this logic. The things once there, mankind, individually or collectively, can do with them as they like. Why was there so little ice in Raleigh? Well, the first answer is the hurricane. The hurricane had made people desperate for ice and made it hard to produce. But why didn't people bring ice to Raleigh? Because it's illegal. It's against the law. There's an anti-gouging law. Hundreds of people would have been bringing ice to Raleigh if there weren't a law against it. What happened was that these rednecks who were too stupid to know tried to do it anyway. But almost everybody else did not bring ice to Raleigh. Well, what I want to argue about voluntary exchange is this. Voluntary exchange is always just. Exchange that is not voluntary is nonetheless often welfare enhancing. Objections to exchange are generally misplaced objections to disparities in the pre-existing underlying distribution of wealth and power, which exchange actually mitigates. Okay, that's a bunch of stuff. I'm going to take a little while to explain it. But first, let me give you an example. Does anybody know what a sweatshop is? Sweatshop. It's a name that is given to a factory, a manufacturing facility, that has low wages, unsafe conditions, and long hours. So in the United States, we tend to think of sweatshops, or in Europe, we would think of sweatshops as places probably in Southeast Asia, maybe in Africa, that don't pay very well and that exploit their workers. And by exploit, we mean don't pay them as much as we think they should. So let's assume this is not slavery, it's not human trafficking, you're not chained to the machine. You walk into a sweatshop and you say, I'm here to rescue you. How many of y'all want to be fired? Raise your hand. Nobody? But I'm here to rescue you. This is a sweatshop. Are you too stupid to understand? This is a sweatshop. Nobody in the sweatshop wants to be fired. That's the best job they can find. Their next best job is farther away, pays less. It may be prostitution. It may be selling drugs. This is the best job they can find. The fact that it's a sweatshop in Germany doesn't mean it's a sweatshop in Thailand. It may be the best job that people can find. So, is their participation as workers in the sweatshop voluntary? Is it truly voluntary? No, not really. It's their best chance, just like the people buying ice. Would you help them by outlawing their employment there? This is something I often have an argument with about students at Duke. There's an organization at Duke University called Students Against Sweatshops. And they're convinced that they're going to help the workers of the world. So Duke buys t-shirts and hoodies and all sorts of stuff, underwear probably, that has Duke on it. And we all buy that because we're very proud to be part of Duke. Well, these are made in factories in Southeast Asia. And the students protest and say, this is not right. We shouldn't be buying from sweatshops. Well, what would happen if we didn't? The sweatshop would close and they would have an even worse job. So what we're really talking about is the moral smugness of rich white people. All we're talking about is the moral smugness of rich white people who want to feel good about themselves. But then when they close the factory, it actually makes the workers worse off. So in philosophy, there's a condition, and it's not very imaginatively named. It's called non-worseness. If I'm actually concerned about the welfare of someone else, my solution can't make them even worse off. So my moral objections can't make them even worse off. If I say I don't like sweatshops, that's fine. If I say the fact that I think there shouldn't be sweatshops implies that we're going to close them, that actually makes things even worse. So that was why here I said objections to exchange are generally misplaced objections to the disparities in the pre-existing underlying distribution of wealth and power. So, should people have to work in sweatshops? I'm willing to say no. They shouldn't have to work in sweatshops. It doesn't follow that closing the sweatshop is the solution. In fact, the sweatshop is their only way out. That's the best chance. Their access to market wages is their best chance to escape poverty. It's actually an improvement. Now, I admit it's a shame that that's true. Well, the same thing may be true for the ice. So consider the people in Raleigh. People in Raleigh are waiting in line. Should they have to pay $11 a bag for ice? I'm willing to say no. There's not enough ice. We have to convince more people to bring ice to Raleigh somehow. And a high price is one way of doing that. So I wanted to define what would it take to make an exchange truly voluntary. So everybody would agree that the exchange is truly voluntary. There's 6 conditions, and I'll go through them quickly. Conventional ownership. That is, both of us agree what it means to own something. Conventional capacity to transfer. So we know what it means to buy and sell things. Third, the absence of post-exchange regret. Now this covers 2 things. 1, fraud. If I buy a car from you and I open up the hood and there's no engine, that's not really a car. Or compulsion that results from addiction. So if I'm a heroin addict and I want to buy heroin, I don't really want to buy heroin. I prefer not to be addicted. So I regret having bought the heroin even though it feels really good for a couple of hours after I shoot up. But I would prefer not to have spent $200 on doing something that's damaging my heart. So, no compulsions and no post-exchange regret from fraud. Fourth, the absence of uncompensated externalities. If there's an externality, it means that our exchange harms someone else without their consent. That can't possibly be voluntary. 5, neither party is coerced in the sense of being forced to exchange by threat. That's clearly not voluntary. I drew a line here because I think this is where most economists would stop. Those first 5 conditions are sufficient to make an exchange voluntary. Philosophers want to add a 6th, and that's the condition that makes it voluntary. You're not compelled by circumstance. You're not compelled by circumstance. So circumstances can be just as much compulsion as holding a gun to someone's head. Now, you might say that I'm analyzing the contents of an empty box and there's nothing like that. I think this is not true. There are some things that are voluntary. So in the political world, power is the capacity of one person to impose on others through the threat of violence. But in the economic world, power is the lack of competition. And economists, when they talk about perfectly competitive markets, are actually assuming something that's important. There are many buyers and many sellers. Competition means many buyers and many sellers. Well, if there's many buyers and many sellers and the product is homogeneous, then I'm not really compelled by circumstance. The time that I'm compelled by circumstance is the sort of example that philosophers usually use. You and I are in the desert, you have water, can you charge me a high price? You and I are in the desert, we're both thirsty, you have plenty of water. I say, can I have some water? And you say, no, but I'll sell it to you. Well, there's not many buyers and many sellers. I'm the only buyer, I desperately need water, I'll die without it. So economists and philosophers are really talking about different things. So let me skip over this technical part, and let's consider this. And it's an example of an exchange that's possibly not truly voluntary. So I go to a grocery store, Kroger is a grocery store in the United States, and I'm going to buy a liter of water. And I see that they've marked a liter of water for $1,000. Am I angry? Maybe, but I probably laugh. I could go somewhere else and buy water, you idiots. I go somewhere else and I can get a liter of water for $2. And so I'm not really upset. There's many buyers and many sellers, and so it's okay. Is that a voluntary exchange? Sure. Assuming that the water is not poisonous, that I'm not a water addict and I'm compelled to drink water. No one's holding a gun to my head. It's actually good water. It's what I expect it to be. Yes, that's a voluntary exchange. So let's suppose instead, this is the way philosophers think, I'm out in the desert, I've been there for several days, I got lost, and I'm dying of thirst. I have a lot of money in my pocket, but I know that if I don't get water soon, I'll die. And then I hear, like an aural mirage, a sound. It's the sound of a truck. Listen, the truck. Over the hill the truck comes, and it's a taco truck. Tony's taco truck. And he has two specials. One is 3 tacos for $5, and the other one is a bottle of water for $1,000 worth 3 bottles for $2,500. I'm angry. Well, think about it. Wouldn't you be angry? I really need water. Here comes the truck. Oh, I'm saved. I got water. You got money? It's not right. He says, okay, and starts to start the truck and leave. Wait, I'll take this special. $2,500 for 3 liters of water, please. And I hand over the $2,500. Now, you could say it's a more interesting problem if I don't have the money, but I do. And he was, in fact, out looking for people who had money, just like the spaceman who was selling spacesuits. Is he a bad person? Well, Judge Stuart Mill would say yes, because he said the things once there, you're basically obliged to share them. Why is he there? Why is he driving around out in the desert looking for people who need water? Because he knows that if he finds one, they'll really, really be desperate and they'll pay him a lot. Should it be illegal? Well, if it were illegal, he wouldn't be out in the desert looking for people who need water. He'd be back at the construction site with all the other taco trucks. I would die. That would violate the principle of non-worseness. I'd be worse off if I were denied the chance to make this purchase. So suppose we say we don't want people to be exploited. We're going to outlaw this transaction. We're actually harming the people we say we want to help. So here's the claim that I want to finish with. A lot of times when we object to what look like the unfairness of markets, what we're really objecting to is the pre-existing distribution of wealth and power. It's a shame that I'm out in the desert and I don't have any water. The question is, what can we do to make me better off? And one thing you might say is the state should provide me with some water. And that would be great. If the state provided me with some water, I wouldn't need to buy any. And Tony wouldn't be able to sell it for $1,000 a bottle. That's the answer that people usually have for the ice. Why doesn't the state, after the emergency, bring in ice and provide it to the citizens? Well, suppose it did. Then it would be impossible to sell ice for $11 a bag because there would be plenty. Let's suppose the state fails. Well, that means that the high price is a signal of scarcity. And that's the thought I want to leave you with. These policies that try to regulate price confuse cause and effect. I realize you've been in here a while, it's kind of warm. I've said a bunch of stuff. Pay attention for a second. Wake up. Price is a signal of scarcity. It's not scarcity itself. Price is a signal of scarcity. It's not scarcity itself. If regulate price, you make the problem of scarcity worse. If you regulate price, you make the problem of scarcity worse. And you say you want to solve the problem of scarcity. So there's not enough ice. We've decided there's not enough ice. Isn't the way to solve the problem trying to bring more ice in? But the way to do that is to encourage more people to bring it. The only way to do that is to have a high price. The paradox is that to have a low price, you have to allow a high price. Suppose we wanted to play soccer. We wanted to have a soccer game. And we look outside and it's 31 degrees, that's too hot. I say, oh wait, look, there's a thermometer. Let's suppose that this is a thermometer. I have some ice. I'll put the ice on the thermometer. Look, it's coming down. It was 29. It's down to 26. It's down to 23. What do y'all want? 16? 16 is a nice temperature to play soccer. Okay. The thermometer says 16. Let's go play soccer. It's still 29. That didn't help at all. Regulating price is exactly the same thing. The reason the price is high is there's not enough ice. Making the price lower means there'll be even less ice because no one will bring it in. So I understand the sense of moral outrage that people have about exchanges that are not voluntary. But you need to recognize that if you actually care about the problem of scarcity, what you need to do is allow price to signal people that they should bring it in. And it gives them the profit incentive to actually do that. If you don't, you're actually harming the people that you say that you care about. It is the opposite of the intended consequence. So the question is, should we have price gouging laws? Well, the people who clapped thought so. And the interesting thing about that is that they were the ones bearing the material consequence. They still thought that it was morally outrageous that they were being ripped off. So I think it's a legitimate question. Economists need to rethink this too. People have this intuition that it's wrong to be coerced by circumstance. But I think as a practical matter, we need to encourage price to be allowed to fulfill its function. Thank you for being so patient. Thanks for listening.
Now we have 10 minutes for a question, so please raise your hands and I bring you the microphone. If you want, you can ask in Slovak and we can translate it.
Thank you, Professor, for your interesting presentation. I found out about you in your CV that you are dealing in your research also with elections and campaign financing. I would like to ask you, what are your, you could briefly summarize, what are your main findings in this area? Thank you very much.
In elections in the United States, you need to realize you guys have a list system, and so you vote on parties. Parties in the United States are very weak, so we're mostly focused on individuals. And what that means is incumbents have an enormous advantage. So incumbents, if no spending were allowed, incumbents would always win. Any equal amount of spending means that the incumbents would always win. The way for a challenger to win is to spend more. So again, it's the same sort of paradox. The only way to have competitive elections is to encourage campaign spending, because that's the way that you advertise and provide voters with information. We don't use parties to do that. So I think the United States has a weird system. We should probably move to a parliamentary system. I actually think that we have become so candidate-centered that an awful lot of our races are unopposed. But I actually participated in the now famous Citizens United case, where I wrote an amicus brief, a friend of the court brief, that was used by Chief Justice Roberts in questioning some of the witnesses for the other side. And it's a long story, but I think Citizens United was actually correctly decided. My main, even though it created uproar, and that now there's a lot more spending than there was. Still in the United States, we spend less on advertising elections than we do on advertising yogurt and toothpaste. Now, I admit we spend a lot on yogurt and toothpaste, but I'm a contrarian on the claim that we need to get money out of politics. Given our system, we probably need more money in politics for challengers and third parties. It's the only way to challenge the sort of corrupt status quo. I think better still would be to change the system because of the corruption that it has created. So a summary of my findings is I think that our system is pretty badly broken. The solution is not to reduce spending because that would protect incumbents even more.
So another question.
It's like you're being held hostage.
According to your lecture, can I ask, can a high price of a necessary good indicate that the state failed?
If by high you mean much higher than it costs to acquire and bring it?
Yes, for example, the 11 colors of the ice. Can it indicate that the state failed to do something?
Well, it's certainly true that the state must not have brought enough ice or it wouldn't be possible to charge $11. So I think the way to think of it is this. Either, sometimes people say it's the state's job to bring supplies in an emergency. Let's suppose we grant that. If the state brought enough ice, price gouging would be impossible. You couldn't charge $11 because there'd be another truck that the state would be giving it away for free. So it's only failure if you think that that's the state's job. If you think that's the state's job, then yes, the state did fail. And I think in the U.S. we think that's the state's job. We have an agency called FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, that's during Hurricane Katrina, President Bush famously congratulated for doing a good job, and of course they were doing a terrible job. So the reason there were such problems in New Orleans after Hurricane Katrina was that the state was not bringing in supplies. And in fact, what the National Guard did, what the Army did, was surround the city of New Orleans with troops and prevented people from bringing supplies in. There were 2 volunteer groups at Duke that tried to take truckloads of supplies, food and water, to New Orleans. They were prevented by the U.S. Army. And they told them, you might sell this. There's an anti-gouging law, you might try to sell this, we can't allow you to take it in. Now, in another context, that would be an act of war. If an army laid siege to a beleaguered city and prevented needed supplies from being brought in, that would be an act of war. A siege is something you do in war. But the American army did it to an American city. So yes, I think it's a grotesque failure of the state. Now, if the state succeeded, anti-gouging laws would be moot. It would be unnecessary. If the state fails, then we need to allow high price to encourage people to bring it in. Did you have a follow-up?
Yes, but if there are some things that we think that the state should do, so we can generalize that if the prices are high, so that the state fails. Is that right?
You mean, are we wrong to think the state should do it in the first place?
I think that we think that some things the state should do. So can we just say that if the prices are high, so can we think that yes, they are high because they fail?
Well, this wouldn't be a problem if I spoke Slovak, so I appreciate you trying to speak. It's my ignorance that's the problem. There are 2 questions that you're raising, and it's complicated. One is, what is the proper role of the state? And the other is, what is the domain of things where we should use prices? So maybe in an emergency, it's wrong to use prices for things people need. That's what the state should do. You can't really say that the state failed. The market shouldn't be there at all. I think that the market is the fastest way to bring supplies when people need them. The state is slow. And I don't see how it makes anyone worse off to have the option to buy ice for $11. Because if you have a law, what is the price of ice? It's infinity. I can't get it. Well, 11 is lower than infinity. So we're bringing the price down. We're not raising it from $1.50. That doesn't exist. That's gone. So without the price system, the price is infinity. I can't get ice. The market is offering me the option to buy it at $11. I may say no, but I don't see how I can be made worse off by having that additional option. So now that I understand your argument, I think it is a sensible one. You might just want to say, the market shouldn't be involved here. This is the state's job. And so you can't say that it failed, it's just the market shouldn't be there at all. I think we're better off allowing the market to have the role that it can play. And I think that's debatable. You could say it's just wrong to charge prices, and I think you shouldn't do it. They clapped after all. So I think that's a sensible position. It's one I disagree with, but it's a sensible position.
I'm teacher of economics, and my question is, at the beginning you said that the government should facilitate voluntary exchange. So my question is, what's your opinion about healthcare insurance, about the situation when the government forces people to buy something?
You may remember, I think it was condition 4, was no uncompensated externalities. And so one of the reasons why you might be forced to buy health insurance or might be forced to buy car insurance is that if I don't have car insurance and I have a wreck, it means the state or somebody else has to pay the cost of me doing that. If I don't have health insurance, but I'm injured or I get sick, I go to the hospital, they'll still provide for my care because they can't turn anybody away. So that's not a truly voluntary exchange if there are externalities. And so I would say that the state requiring things like insurance is actually facilitating voluntary exchange because it means people can't take advantage by cheating, by free riding. So insurance, that's actually the argument for insurance, is we want to prevent externalities. And so regulation of pollution and things like that. Markets are just not very good at handling those things. So in conditions when markets fail and externalities are an important one, then the role of the state in facilitating exchange is precisely to figure out a property rights scheme or a tax scheme that helps us internalize them.
Hello. I'm wondering for your opinion if we apply an example of selling ice to the praxis, we get the monopoly in some way. And
but why do we have a monopoly seller? Because selling ice is illegal. You get rid of the law, there'd be hundreds of trucks.
So
you're right, it's a problem.
Yeah, it would be because if it is. I'm sorry.
But again, if I spoke slow back, this would be it's my ignorance that's the problem. I'm sorry.
It would be another thing for selling. So we got a monopoly, and I will ask you if do you think if monopoly helps in some way to harm the market, or you're just for taking out the monopoly of the market?
That's a great question. The answer is really long, so let me give an answer that, because it's brief, is inadequate. I think the first answer is the only reason there's a monopoly here is that there's a law, and that's what prevents entry. But it's a sensible question, and philosophers tend to think of this as the lifeboat problem. So we're all in a lifeboat. I have enough water for all of us to survive. We're going to be rescued in a week. I have enough water that all of us can survive. But I don't want to give it to you, I want to sell it. And it's worth to you basically the value of your life. So I want all of you to promise to give me $1 million when we get back to shore.